Okay, all right. I guess that's it. Okay, well, what I want to talk about today is the final project. So you guys formed some groups, which is great. And before you guys leave today, you should schedule your first group meeting, okay? Schedule and say, hey, let's figure out a time to meet. And it could be, you decide to meet on Zoom or you meet in person. Probably meeting in person, you'll get a little bit more done, a little bit quickly, a little bit faster. But, if it's not convenient for you guys, you can do Zoom, or like 3 of you meet together and 1 of you is on Zoom or whatever. Okay, whatever you guys need to do. And so this project, it's worth a lot. And I think, in my opinion, this is where you will gain a lot of kind of, my hope, kind of real life experience in terms of working with data. Because I mean, I show you stuff on the lecture slides, you have your textbook, you have data camp, and I think those are all good. Those are all good ways of learning and, getting some experience. But, in my opinion, kind of the real learning, the real kind of experience happens like on the job, right? And this is kind of like this little project that gives you just some experience with data analysis, okay? A big part of this is I want you to develop the ability to look at data and think about it critically, okay? Just because a data set exists out there doesn't mean it's a good data set, okay? Doesn't mean that it's reliable, doesn't mean that it's accurate, things like that. So what is it? It's the end of week 3, okay? So you'll meet with your group, week 4, week 5, and stuff like that. And then during week 6, I will meet with your group for the first time. This is going to be your proposal meeting. All right, and during the proposal meeting, you will say, this is the data set we found. This is kind of what we want to explore with the data set. And I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions, okay? So sometimes students feel like I'm being mean during these proposal meetings or during these things. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to tell you, like, I'm trying to think critically about the data, and I want you to think critically about the data. So I'm going to ask questions like, okay, where did this data come from? How do you know it's trustworthy? Do these values add up and things like that? And so I want you to think about the data sets critically. And I'll talk about the proposal meeting and all of that, but that's going to be an important thing. Okay. Also, as you meet in your groups, I want you guys to document your meetings. Okay. And you don't have to take like meeting minutes and say like, oh, at 7:01 p.m. is when meeting began and stuff like that. But just kind of a brief summary of like what you guys talked about, what you guys did, and then basically goals for the next meeting, tasks that kind of need to be done, and things like that. I think that will help with some of the group dynamic stuff. I think we've all experienced being in a group project where not everybody carried their own weight, and that can be a frustrating experience. And so, my hope is when you document things and it's kind of made clear what's expected of everyone, that's going to make it easier to see like if people are carrying their own weight or not, versus just kind of this internal feeling like I don't feel like everybody else is doing, stuff like that. Okay. And then yeah, the bulk of it's going to be you exploring the data, creating visualizations, working with things like that. Okay. And then, if we need to perform statistical tests and fit models, that will be that. And you'll do some, communicate your findings. Okay. So anyway, establish groups of 4. And it looks like we've got that mostly covered here. If something happens, somebody drops the class, it happens. Okay. You're down group of 3 or something. And then, there's going to be students who were not here today. And, I'll probably just assign people who aren't part of a group into a couple groups, and but ideally, yeah, groups of 4 is what we've got. Okay, so so you guys here, I'll take a screenshot of this at 10 o'clock, and we'll make sure you guys get your extra credit for being here and forming your group. Okay. Obviously, before you leave, make sure you get everybody's email address, make sure you get their contact information. If you communicate better via text message, then exchange, whatever you need to do. Campus Wire has a built-in kind of chat room feature as well, which can be useful. And then if you have a chat room, you can also loop me into the chat room, or if you have questions or something like that. Or you can have a separate chat room, right? Chat room for yourselves, and then chat room when you include me. And if you have questions, then I can try to do that. I will talk about how you should go about picking your data. Okay, and so that will be in a moment here. But yeah, you will have a project proposal meeting. Okay, that will take place during 6th week. I'll have a schedule where you can kind of sign up. We'll schedule them for 20 minutes, but I'll kind of schedule them half an hour apart, because sometimes these things run long, especially if I have a bunch of questions about your data. And hang on, let me start pulling up lecture view quiz things. And basically the project proposal is just to make sure that the data set you're working with is a good data set and that it's a reasonable scope to do. All right. The very first time I did a group project where it was data analysis, a couple groups, they ended up with disasters because the data set that they were working with was basically like simulated data. It was like fake data. And so, the results were kind of meaningless. Okay. They weren't useful. They weren't. And but it was like, they had gotten to the final day, and I realized, okay, I need to intervene earlier. I need to kind of check in earlier to kind of make sure everything's kind of good. So during the proposal meeting, you have to have that data. I'm going to ask you to send me basically either a copy of the data or a link to the data that you're going to be using, and I'll kind of be looking through it myself. I'll be looking for anything kind of unusual. Okay. Ideally, so the minimum number of observations in your data set, you need to have, I'm going to say you need a minimum of 40 observations. Okay. Probably the ideal number is somewhere between a few hundred, maybe between 300 observations and 10,000 observations. Probably the ideal number for how many observations you can have. Okay. Now, you can go much larger than that. There are lots of data sets where there are like hundreds of thousands, millions of observations. And that's fine. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. If you find a data set that seems really interesting and you want to work with a big data set, but there's no, you don't get like bonus points for working with a big data set. Okay. And working with a big data set introduces its own set of headaches. One of them just being like, it's going to slow your computer down. Okay. So when you have like this massive data set, that your computer has to load that whole thing into memory, or if it can't fit in memory, it's going to be talking back and forth with the hard drive. And so like doing any kind of processing or calculation on this massive data set is going to take a while. And that can be frustrating. You want to create a plot, you got to wait a few seconds for each kind of plot, right? If you only have a few thousand, each plot's going to be a lot quicker, a lot faster to plot. So, if you find an interesting data set that you love and you want to use it and it's huge, you can do that. But just know it. Big data sets come with their own set of headaches, right? And that's like a whole separate like sector of the internet, right? All of this cloud computing that's developed for like handling these huge things. Okay. Whatever data set you pick, at least one person on your team has to be knowledgeable on that thing. So, classic example I use is, again, I keep adding rules as the more I teach, because I realize, oh, you know what, this didn't work out, right? So first time I did it, I had students do like a wine data set, but nobody knew anything about wine, right? So unless you have an expert, somebody who feels like they're very knowledgeable on wine, maybe their family owns a winery, right? And so they're, even if they're younger or something, maybe not even of drinking age, they might know a lot about wine just from like family exposure and stuff like that. That's fine. Okay. But if nobody knows anything about wine, you shouldn't be doing a wine data set, right? So at least one person should be knowledgeable about it. Or if it's just a subject where no one's really knowledgeable, but you feel really like into this subject and you're willing to do a lot of reading and research, that's fine. Okay. It's got to be a real data set, can't be a simulated data set. And you need to be able to explain, be able to explain where this data came from. Okay. Perhaps the data was scraped off the internet, okay? Or maybe it's reported. And if it's reported or something, are these values measured or are they self-reported, right? So if you do a survey, it's going to be kind of self-reported stuff versus things that are measured. So, a common example, you can say like, okay, we got the heights of people. Okay, great, all right. The heights of people coming from, say, patient records from either a hospital or a doctor's office will probably be different from height records if you downloaded them from some dating app, right? So, because dating app heights, self-reported, and so self-reported things aren't always 100% accurate, right? And so, that's something to keep in mind. So you should know if something is self-reported or if it's measured, right? And these are the kinds of things I want you to start thinking about when I say like, think critically about the data, right? Think critically about the data. Just because you see height measurements doesn't necessarily mean they're 100% accurate, right? Is there a reason why this might not be 100% accurate? That's a silly example, but also a real example, right? And I think we are able to think critically about certain things, right? Like when you go, before you start buying a product, you read reviews about the product online. But I think we know not to just take reviews at face value online, right? Because we know there's a problem with people writing fake reviews, people getting paid money to, write glowing reviews, people who receive free products and things like that. And so, we're aware of some of these issues because, we have a little bit more familiarity with it. But I think we don't have as much familiarity with, some of the broader issues with with data sets, right? A lot of these similar kinds of like accuracy and things like that, those kinds of questions, they exist as well, okay? You got to be able to explain every kind of column in the data. This thing, does this work? Okay, so, here's this data set, right? Graduate admission 2 or something, right? And it's got these numbers, things like the GRE score, TOEFL score, university rating, undergraduate GPA, and chance of admit, okay? And you look at this data set and you go, oh, okay. And people thought, oh, this was an interesting thing, okay? But then I asked, what is this column? Chance of admit, okay? Chance of admit. And you got something like, okay, here's a student with their GRE score is this, and their TOEFL score is this, and blah, 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 blah. And their chance of admit is 0.8. Where do you think this number came from? Yeah, what?
All of those columns again. I guess the chance of admittance.
Okay, so is that a reliable? Is that a reliable way to measure admission? Because when you apply to a school, either you get in or you don't, right? Your chance you don't ever hear from the admissions committee and they're like, oh, your chance was admission was 75%, and then we rolled the dice and it came out and you got in. Okay, you either get in or you don't, right? So this chance of admit, I don't even know what it is, and I was trying to research and I don't think I found a satisfactory answer. I think ultimately it came down to like the person just gave themselves a chance of admission. It was just kind of like, based on my thing, I think I've got an 80% chance of getting in, which is like, okay, this is completely worthless, right? And so, there's some data sets where you're like, oh, that seems kind of cool. Let's look at this, right? Or yeah, maybe they did plug it into some algorithm and it spits out this thing, but then is this actually useful? Or are we just trying to backwards engineer some algorithm that who knows if is even useful, right? How do we even know if this algorithm is any good? We don't, right? So that is a total junk data set that don't use. Okay, don't use that thing. This is not the what happened to the tab? Okay, I need to go back. Okay, so anyway, don't use the graduate. Okay, how do I pick up where you left off? Yes, please go away. So anyway, do this assessment of its trustworthiness. All right, and I've got some guidelines on how to kind of pick that. Right, document your group meetings. I have a little template on Brew and Learn that you can use for how you should document your meeting notes. It's pretty simple. Basically, the structure of the template is who attended. All right, was anybody absent? Right? Did you schedule a meeting and was there anybody absent? Because you know, if somebody consistently misses group meetings, like that's not a good thing. Okay, so just keep attendance of your group meeting, and then you know, what'd you do, right? Basically, quick discussion. And depending on your group dynamic, there's a couple approaches that could work for getting work done. Okay, one is you basically do all of your work as a group. So you say, you know, this is gonna require you to schedule a bunch of group meetings, and these group meetings are gonna be long, right? And when you meet, you're doing like all of your work together. You're kind of constantly collaborating, constantly talking. These will probably be in-person meetings, and you know, you meet for a few hours at a time. You're writing your report together, you're doing your analysis together, and things like that. Okay. And then the other style of meeting is you divvy up your work, okay, and you say you're going to take care of this, 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 and then when you meet, you say, okay, did everybody do what they said they were going to take care of? Let's kind of combine it together and see if this still works and it makes sense. And then, you know, as a group, you kind of look at the whole product together to make sure the pieces are fitting together properly. And then you say, okay, you know, so, you know, it still takes time because you got to make sure the pieces work together. And then you say, okay, for the next group meeting, you know, you're going to take care of this, and you're going to take care of this, and you're going to take care of this, right? And so those ones are a little bit more status update things. And so depending on how it goes, what your group dynamic is, you're going to have, there's kind of two parts. One part is like what happened during the meeting. And then the other part is like, what is everyone's tasks that they're going to do on their own. Okay. And so if it's like, we're working together a lot, then the what happened during the meeting section will be a little bit longer. And what everybody's doing on their own might be really, really short. Just kind of like everyone's going to kind of proofread the work that we did together and, you know, make notes and, you know, make updates and suggestions to kind of, you know, fine tune whatever we'll work together. Okay. Versus, you know, if it's the other style where everyone's kind of doing a lot of work independently, you know, what we did together will be shorter. Okay. And then what everybody's responsible for is going to be longer. You know, I forgot. Let me give you view quiz answers. First two view quiz answers today will be B and D. B as in bear, D as in dog. B and D will be your first two view quiz answers. B as in bear, D as in dog. So I want you guys to document your group meetings, and you will be required a minimum of 4 meetings, one before the proposal meeting and a minimum of 3 after. Probably meet more often, probably meet at least every week, but we'll have that, okay? And then so document your group meetings, and that will be that, okay? And then generally everybody will receive the same grade in a group, unless like I'll just kind of quickly flip through your meeting notes, and if it seems like, okay, this person continually missed things, you know, we'll maybe we can make adjustments and things like that. Okay, the written technical report, you'll have kind of background information, exploratory analysis, and some data modeling, and I'll get into these into the future. But right now, and then at the end there's a final presentation. And then let me just tell you about the final presentation, because we're gonna. How many groups are there? There's, I don't know, 12, 14 groups, something like that. I'm going to schedule basically a 1-hour meeting with each group. Okay. And this will be during 10th week and finals week. And I'll have a sign up schedule and we'll set up a thing. And during, and you'll have your written report ready to go. And during these final presentation meetings, you'll present maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay. And then the remaining portion, so I'll schedule them for about 50 minutes, but space them about an hour apart. The remaining, 40 minutes or so, I will read through your written report. Okay. And then I'll ask questions about it. And then I'll grade it right there. All right. So, during that part, there'll be a little bit of back and forth. I'll ask you questions, why'd you do this? And does this, how'd you come to this decision and things like that? And I'll give you my assessment of that. So that's, a long meeting. And again, I'll talk about that. But right now, yeah, question.
So, will the group be marked collectively, or will it be will you give marks individually?
So generally, everybody in the group will get the same grade. That's going to be 99% of the cases, okay, or 90-something% of the cases, right? But again, I have, part of it is you're documenting your meetings, right? And you'll turn in your meeting notes, and I'll just review them kind of briefly. And if it's like in your meeting notes, it's like this person didn't show up and they missed, out of the 5 meetings we had, this person only came to 2 of them, that's a problem. And I'll say, hey, what's going on? And I'll say, I'll put you a little bit on the spot and I'll say, hey, do you feel like this person contributed, adequately, and things like that. And if there's kind of a general consensus that no, this person wasn't good, then, maybe that individual will get marked down. Okay. But I would say, I don't want to do that, right? That like feels bad for everybody involved. But it also, it has been an issue in the past, and I think we can imagine something like that happening in some cases, hopefully not, right? But it does happen. And, sometimes it's like this, the individual had something, personal going on, and, we're not angry, but at the same time, the person, everybody else had to work way harder. Okay. And so how do we deal with that? So, okay, let me talk about how you're going to go about finding a data set. Okay. Because this is going to be important. This is really going to set the trajectory of your group, right? And if you pick a junk data set, it's going to throw things off. Okay, where can you find data? There's lots of places online where you can find data. But again, the important thing is you need to think critically about the data set that you're working with. Okay, so some good places, all right? So there is data.gov. This is the US government's kind of open data like set, okay? And there are different organizations that kind of have these open data things, and they share their stuff, okay? This document is on Bruinler, okay? But yeah, you can go, they have stuff from the city of Los Angeles, stuff from the government of California, state of California, but they have, different organizations, I don't know, EPA, the Census Bureau, things like that, all kinds of data sets. And in general, most of these things will be fairly trustworthy, right? They're coming from a government organization. In general, United States, again, so public trust in government institutions maybe is eroding a little bit, but in general, these will be fairly reliable, fairly trustworthy sources of data, okay? You can search by keyword, you can search by topic. A few that are also worth highlighting. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a lot of kind of economics data. So things like unemployment, but also consumer price index, where you can track inflation, things like that. There's kind of some interesting things there. Census data has a lot of demographic stuff, are certain states, certain counties, certain sections of the United States, different, racial demographics, different, gender things, different age groups, things like that. A lot of kind of information there. And then you also have, health related data. The CDC has this thing called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, where they kind of do things like they measure the heights of people and, other health measurements, their vitals, their blood pressure, their this and that. And so there's interesting data sets there. Okay. There's something called Dataverse. Okay. Dataverse is a lot of kind of academic data sets. So, for research, academic research and stuff like that, a lot of scientists, obtain data and then they share their data. Okay. Not every scientist, not every professor is required to share their data, but a lot of them do. And kind of the platform that they use for that is Dataverse. And so, there's a Dataverse at UCLA, and, there's, data related to research and things like that. This might be some really like obscure data sets that you're like, I have no idea about any of this stuff. Okay. But, like Harvard has a lot of their data available online as well. So, there's a lot of interesting things out there, but a little bit, some of it is also like really weird and not weird, but just like obscure, where you're like, okay, they did this interesting thing, but it's like, I really have no idea about any of this stuff that they're talking about. So just some word of cautions there. Okay. Kaggle and data.world are these kind of crowdsource data sets. So basically anybody can upload a data set to Kaggle or data.world. And some of these data sets that they upload are really interesting. Okay. So these are like user submitted data sets. Now, one thing is that, it's like, user submitted videos on YouTube, right? And it's like, some of them are like high production value, great content, great quality. Okay. And then some are just like some goofy kid fiddling around with their camera and it's totally crap, right? And, we can assess video quality fairly easily. All right. And then also on YouTube, it's like somebody with, some kind of political agenda and they're spewing kind of nonsense, right? So you have to be careful because the same kind of problems exist with these places on Kaggle and data.world is that, yes, some of the data sets on there, very high quality, very interesting stuff, really great stuff. Okay. Some of it, people have some kind of, ulterior motive and just posting nonsense. Okay. And then some of it is just somebody fiddling around. They said, hey, I want to do some web scraping, but they don't really know what they're doing. So they did a really bad job of web scraping. And so, the fields are all botched. The data is all dirty. The numbers got messed up. And they just said, hey, here it is. Okay. And so you have to, so if you're getting something from Kaggle or data.world or something like that, really look at it carefully. Okay. And just kind of make sure that, the values you see make sense. It's going to be really important that you kind of look for a different site or a different source of information that can kind of corroborate this, right? It says, if it's saying like, if the data set says, okay, we're going to look at, I don't know, admissions data for different colleges, interesting topic. Okay. That kind of information is available at different sites as well, right? You can go to like, and maybe it's not in an easily downloadable data set. Okay. So, on Kaggle, it says, okay, here's this data set that you can just download. And you go, oh, this is great. But then what you want to do is you want to say, okay, let's look at this row, right? And then let's look at UCLA. And because UCLA publishes like, this is how many students applied, this is how many students we admitted, et cetera, et cetera. And you can kind of see, all right, when I went to UCLA's webpage and it posted this, and I looked at this data set, the data matches up, right? If I go to, this university's thing, or if I go to this other place, the data matches up, and therefore I feel confident about the values in this data set, okay? Versus, okay, here are just some values, and I'm gonna just trust it blindly, okay? So, Kaggle, again, some really great stuff on there, but also a lot of junk on there, okay? And that's any place where there's user submitted stuff, you're gonna have that kind of issue, okay? There is this blog, Data is Plural, there's this just kind of this, it's actually, I guess, a newsletter. An individual kind of finds some interesting data sets and kind of shares them. So this is not really a place, it's not a repository of data, but it's just kind of like links to a bunch of other interesting data sets that this individual has found. And again, a lot of them are vary in quality, so use your judgment there, right? And then if you're into sports, these sites I would recommend, and I think they are generally very, very trustworthy. So basically all of the sports reference families. And if you're into sports, you're probably already familiar with a lot of these sites. You got like basketball reference, baseball reference, pro football reference, hockey reference, things like that. There's a lot of kind of data that you can kind of download from those things, okay? If you're into political stuff, there's election data at the MIT Election Lab. We'll have some things, okay? And then other stuff, you can just kind of search, right? You can just go on Google and search, but again, use caution, right? Everything on the internet, you have to be a little bit skeptical of. So you can just type in some keywords, something you're interested in, data. Another keyword that you might want to add is the CSV. Okay, CSV is, you know, basically the file format for a lot of kind of data files. And so you can just say like, oh, you know, video games, CSV file or something like that. And you'll find some kind of data set. But again, anytime you go on the internet, just searching for something and you don't know the source of the thing, always kind of actually look at the individual rows and say, okay, I'm going to look at this thing. I'm going to go out and try to verify, right? And then the last thing is, you know, scraping your own data. I would say scraping your own data is a little bit beyond the scope of this course. I don't plan on covering like how to go about web scraping, but I don't know. Has anybody done some web scraping of their own? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Well, if you are familiar with the idea of web scraping, you are not banned from doing it, but you know, you don't get bonus points for web scraping. Okay. And then if you do a bad job web scraping, you'll actually lose points. So, so I would say, you know, probably not the best, you know, try to find something from some other place, a little bit better. Okay. Let me give you your last view quiz answer. Last view quiz answer today is the letter A. A as in apple. A as in apple. All right. And then, so how do you check if the data is reliable? How can you check if the data is reliable? So this is an important question as you go out searching for data. Okay. One is check the source of the data. So if you think about, you know, who's publishing this data, think about how trustworthy or reliable that source of data is. Does that organization have any kind of motivation or quote, you know, agenda behind its thing? Maybe, maybe not, right? And, you know, in general, a lot of our government institutions, we can, I don't know, maybe I feel like we can trust them in the United States, but, you know, the same can't be said about, you know, every kind of, every nation on the planet. You know, if their government publishes some data, you know, maybe it can or cannot be trusted. Okay. Are you able to check the history of the data being published? Okay, so sometimes you can kind of look at archival things and you can see, all right, historically, you know, these values are recorded, and you know, this corroborates or matches, you know, other sources of information. Okay. Another thing is a good sign is if the data has good documentation. So a lot of times, you know, especially if you do like academic research, and you look at the data from academic research, it will be very documented how they went about collecting this data. And there will be a lot of kind of like disclaimers or things where they say, okay, we recognize this is a shortcoming in our data, right? When we did these medical questions and things like that. So you want to see if there's good documentation that explains each variable, explains each of these things. That's generally a good sign. And yeah, and the documentation should explain if the values are self-reported or if they've been measured. Okay. And then again, do other sources of information corroborate the values seen in your data set, right? So can you check someplace like Wikipedia and does that match? Or can you check some other kind of website, or, you know, if it has, again, I gave the example about like university admissions, that might be gathered in a convenient single data set, and you go, okay, I want to use this. Well, then go to, you know, each of the individual universities and see if you can kind of verify that stuff. Okay. Another thing that you should look for is the data internally consistent? So within your data set, there might be already some kind of subgroups and maybe some subtotals that exist, right? So it might be like, okay, for this demographic, these are the numbers we did, but then when we did it for, you know, for all people, these are the total numbers and things like that. Well, what you should see is that the different subgroups should add up to the total numbers, okay? And so there should be some internal consistency in your data. And if something is not internally consistent, then that's an indication that there might be a problem, okay? Another, you know, other kind of things that indicate problems of internal consistency. This happens a lot with web scraping, is you'll have kind of these duplicate entries, okay? A lot of times with web scraping, they'll like run a web scraping job on this day, and then they run the same or a similar job another day, okay? And when they run the web scraping kind of jobs on different days, like it picks up the same kind of thing, you know, but on day one, it had like, you know, if they were like, okay, let's look at like, I don't know, YouTube videos and their views, okay? You know, it might be like, okay, these were the top 100 videos on this day, and, you know, it was this music video. And then when they run it again a week later, you know, it's the same music video, but it's got like updated count, okay? And maybe that's interesting, where you want the two separate things, or maybe you actually don't want to have separate entries, right? So you got to think about how, you know, do I want to see the same video show up multiple times? Do I really only want one video and I just want the maximum value? There's questions that you got to be asking and things like that, right? Also, you know, just look for any kind of outliers. Are there certain values in here that just don't make sense? If we're measuring height values, do we see somebody who's 8.5 feet tall? Maybe that's not actually accurate. Excuse me. Okay, sorry for going over our time. Check with your group, set up a group meeting, exchange all of your information, and have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.